Hey folks, we're going to get started here in about 1 minute, but I wanted to see quick if the screen looked good, if people could actually read the code and see the terminal. I'll wait for comments in line. It looks like there's about a 20-second lag, which is a tiny bit annoying. So hopefully I can still hear from folks. So put some comments in the chat. If you can read all the text in the screen, and if you can hear me okay. And we'll get started here pretty soon. Okay, I got some comments. The text is a little small. I'll scale up a little bit here, hopefully not to drive too many people crazy, including myself. Running code with a big screen or big fonts is tough, but we'll get going. Let's see here. Everyone says fine. Made fonts a little bit bigger. Let's get started. I feel a little bit like a talk show host right now, talking to an audience that can't see me. Oops. Already. This is my first live stream, so you guys are all guinea pigs seeing how I do this. I'm streaming from my basement right now, and with a nice blanket behind me. So this is all smoke and mirrors. So today I'm here to talk to you about the build system in Dart. My name is Kevin Moore. I'm a product manager on the Dart team. I'm working on Dart for about 6 years. And I think I was one of the first people to build some kind of crazy Dart build system, and it's cool to see how it's evolved now that real engineers are working on it. So before I dig in here, I wanted to kind of lay some context. These are kind of crazy and, I guess in some cases, scary times. If you're able to watch this live stream on a Wednesday morning, we're probably the lucky ones, unless you guys are off a shift from doing a real job where you have to be out in the world. So it's good to keep that in mind. Hope everyone's taking care of themselves, and I hope everyone is helping out where they can. And this is really just my way of trying to stay connected with folks and encouraging other people to stay connected. I know there's been a lot of folks doing live streams and kind of virtual meetups and spending more time in Stack Overflow and on communities, and that's great. We're really lucky. Our ability to stay connected and look at screens and it usually is made fun of, but in these times it ends up being an asset. So I hope everyone's taking care of themselves, and I'm excited to see if this is something useful and if people like it. So let's get started. So let's talk about the build system in Dart. Yes, first I already see someone making fun of me for not using VS Code. I just like IntelliJ. I never figured out the keyboard shortcuts or got them configured right in VS Code, so I'm happy in IntelliJ. So the build system in Dart, really when I think about it is letting the computer do what the computer does best. I got into programming. I like to joke that I'm a lazy programmer, and a lot of people who like programming I think are lazy, and they realize they can get the computer to do it right once. It's worth having the computer do it. I was the kid in high school. I'd write the function on my TI-85 calculator to do my math homework for me, and it might take me 20 minutes. But then I can finish my homework in 3 minutes, and I was still ahead of people. And so I still do that to this day. And I've realized there's lots of places in software where we have to manually manage things, write boilerplate. What was there's a term internally people are using. Toil was the word. Like anytime you're toiling as an engineer, where you're just kind of having to do repetitive, kind of painful manual stuff, that's a place where you really want to automate. And I think doing code generation is one of those great places where you can have the computer do the hard work for you. And so that's what I want to kind of talk about today. So I want to start out with kind of just an introduction to package build, and I think I have the tab open here to look at. So package build is kind of the root of everything, and what's really exciting about package build is it's absolutely tiny. I think it defines 3 classes. We can actually go look in the API reference here quick. Okay, more than 3 classes, but really 1 base class, and that's this builder class. And if you look at the implementation of builder, it's 1 class and 2 functions. And so the first one is basically something you implement that says, given some input string or some extension that you want to start with, what are your inputs? Given that input, I will generate code with a certain set of outputs. Or generate, and not necessarily code, it could be anything, text files, HTML, YAML, JSON, JavaScript, whatever you want. And so that's the thing that helps you basically map from what inputs you're taking to outputs, and that's fundamentally what build does. And then the build step is you get called with a build step object, which contains some context about your inputs and lets you generate output, synchronously or asynchronously, and that's why it's a feature OR. And so there's a great example of kind of a very simple builder here. It says, okay, I'll take a text file and I'll generate a copy of that text file and write it out. So there's a couple things that the analyzer gives us, and actually that kind of goes back to the slide here. So Hermetic is one of them. And this is actually really important. I watched a video, I think last night, someone pointed on my tweet that you can write builders, and gave a cool demo of doing a builder. And the developer used a builder that included the current time in the output, and I immediately cringed. I was like, no, you should never do anything where your builder includes information that's not hermetic. And obviously the current time is not necessarily a hermetic thing. You want your builds to be consistent across environments, and I'll get into some of that later. So yeah, don't include the timestamps in your build outputs. If you're using package build, it assumes that it kind of owns all the inputs. Something else you should never do in a builder is you should never read files using the Dart.io classes. You should always read them using the build step. And likewise, you should never write files that aren't using the build step. I won't get into that too much today. I think I'll do that in a later video. But you really want to use the build system here, and that's one of the powerful things about the build system. And that gets to the second point, which is it's incremental. Because the build system assumes it knows the world, it knows all of its inputs and outputs, it doesn't let you do things like write over files. You have to create new files. Some people get annoyed with this, but this is actually a huge feature. It's actually inspired by and based off something from, it's called Blaze internally at Google. It's an open source project called Bazel. And actually the build system, the Dart build system integrates with Blaze really well. We use it internally. Is this idea that you want things to be hermetic and incremental. And that means you can do fast things. You can do caching really intelligently. You can only rebuild things that need to be rebuilt. You can be smart, and so that if you change a file and it doesn't affect the build output, the build won't get rebuilt or rerun, which is great. So you can do caching and other things. And so hermetic and incremental are really nice features. And the final thing, which kind of plays on top of both of those, and it's something that wasn't discussed, at least in some of the videos I saw, is this notion that the analyzer is kind of built in and comes along for the ride. And actually I can show that here in the README of the build package, which is you have access to the input library, and you can get a resolver for that library. And so you can find things like the name of the library or all the inputs. And this is kind of the core where you get from just a general build model to something that actually lets you do source generation. So built into the notion of the build package is access to the source if the inputs that are in your build system come from source files, from Dart source files, is you can access those things, and you can walk the library and walk the elements in that library and walk the elements and classes in that library. And that's where a lot of the magic comes. And so if you want to generating code is awesome, and then generating code from other code is even better, because that means you can hoist out a lot of the tedious stuff like generating JSON serialization, and let the computer do the work for you. So that's super cool. I'm going to take a look quick at the chat to see if there's any kind of questions before I go on. And of course, with a 20-second lag here, I'm not going to wait too long to get into things, but let's see if there's anything I've missed. Looking really quick. Everyone's excited to see me. I want to say hola to my friends in Latin America. My wife's from Argentina, which is super exciting, so I'm glad to see an Argentine there. Friends from Mexico. I'm really glad people are here. Chime in quickly on the chat, again with a 20-second lag. I don't want to have to sit here twiddling my thumbs too long. So if you have an issue or a discussion while I'm going along, just chat in there and I'll try to address things. This will be on YouTube afterwards, and I'm guessing I'm guessing most people who watch this are probably going to watch it after the live stream. I'm probably not going to spend too much time going into nitty-gritty with the chat, but I wanted to at least, connect with folks there. So let's talk about an agenda, and this is here as much for myself as for you wonderful folks, because I want to keep track of what I'm talking about. You have basically the simplest builder that exists, just to give a quick introduction. Then I'm going to get into JSON serialization, which is one of the things I've worked on the most, and is basically the OG builder. It existed before there was even a build system, and it's evolved several ways, which is kind of crazy. And then I'll get into some other fun stuff around what you can do with JSON serialization, building your own CLI, how you can test your builder, a bunch of stuff. So let's get going to code. Yes to IntelliJ. So let's see, we have IntelliJ here. And again, chime in really quickly if you have issues seeing the code. Let me just switch over to make sure I can see this is where the keyboard shortcuts get a little funky here. Just to make sure I can see the live stream and that everything is looking good. It looks like it's looking good. Okay. Cleaning up some windows. This is my first time. You guys are really lucky to have me my first time. So I have a package here. I basically built it out with with stagehand. So it's just an empty package with not a lot going on at all, just a main. I want to go in here quick and uncomment the version. Oh, and let's say we're not quite ready to ship. So let's say 1.0 dev. Clear all that out. And it's a common thing to want to access the version of the package you're in via code. You can't do that right now without basically hand wiring the version. The only thing that generally consumers of your package have access to are things in the lib directory, which is fine. And so let's create a builder that gives us easy access to our version. So we'll go into our pub spec. We're going to add a package called build version. I think this is v1. I guess we'll find out. And something else we're going to use is build runner. And I'm not sure, actually I'm not sure either of these versions. So I'm just going to start with this and do an upgrade dependencies. And then this is actually something pretty common I do, is once I do that, I'll go in and say, oh, build runner is 181. Let's just do that. It's good, oops, wrong one. It's good in general, at least in my experience, to have as tight of version constraints as possible, and especially your dev dependencies, which aren't going. If I was going to publish this in a way that someone else could consume this package, the constraints I have on my dev dependencies aren't going to affect anyone consuming my library, and so it's a good way to kind of keep me honest by having as tight of constraints as possible. And so, unless I'm testing in older versions of SDKs that don't support things, I might as well keep these pretty tight. So, build version, that's version 2. So let's do that. Run this again. Cool. And that's all I've done. So I haven't built a build.yaml file or any of the other configuration. I just added some dependencies. And so some context for people know. So build version is a package that has a builder in it, and that's all you need to know. And build runner is the thing that does the work when you're doing the build system. So it's the CLI that you run that makes things work. And so what it gives me is this command, build runner. And a great new feature in the Dart SDK is we don't precompile packages when you do pub get or pub upgrade. Instead, we do it first execution, which means pub get and pub upgrade are faster. And we only precompile the things you use, which is great. And so you see now we have a few commands here. Let's do pub run build runner build. Let's see if I can make this scale a little bit better. You will see, so you see some stuff already talking about, well, because I've changed some configuration in this package and other things, it's going to throw away caches, because there's good caching here. And what you can see right away is I have a version file, which is super exciting. So that's all I had to do. I have a dependency on build runner, and I defended on a builder. And now I have this version thing going on, with a nice reminder telling people, do not modify this. This is generated code. So what's really fun here is I can go in here and and actually I think this won't work as well as I think, because I think we treat the pub spec in a special way. Because we do not want, if you change your pub spec, you might change other things about your build system. And so if I go in here and change this to 1.1.dev and hit save, oh, it is going to rebuild. And you see really quickly, this file gets updated. Let me split horizontally here. And so you can see the first build can be a little slow, but once I get the whole thing running, code's generated really quickly. So that's kind of your simple first builder build version. And so generally the places where I use this, and I would recommend it, is I use it when I'm doing CLI apps. If you want someone to be able to do my command line -- version and print out the version, this is a really easy way to have access to the version information. And also the source code for build version is pretty simple. I think in today's talk I'm not going to get into those things. I'm going to wait till later to get into that more, because I'm also seeing how quickly time's going by. So let's kill our builder right now. Let's get rid of build version, because it's not that interesting. And let's go to JSON Serializable. So let's add JSON Serializable here. I think I'm at version 3. And a JSON annotation here. I think it's 3 something here too. There we go. SourceJen's coming in. Again, maybe in a future talk I'll talk about that. Let's see, is JSON annotation here? It is, great. And let's just pin this a little higher. Cool. So the point of JSON Serializable. What does JSON Serializable let you do? JSON Serializable is a package that lets you annotate. Move my video around a little bit. It lets you annotate a class with some magic annotations, and then it generates source code for you, which is super nice. So let's create a source directory. I don't like having .g files in the root of my lib directory, because then they get imported by folks. So let's do customer.dart is probably, let's stay really old school. So we'll do class customer. Let's do, just to keep things simple, I generally like immutable stuff, but for this demo, it'll be easier if I just do. And let's do bool is important. And maybe just for kicks, let's do even though it makes very little sense, just for fun, let's do map string to customer. Let's make this recursive a little bit, and we'll just call this friends, I guess. Call friends, easy enough. So that's a customer class, nothing special there. And now let's say we want to do JSON serialization with customer. Well, first we can do is let's talk about how JSON serialization works in Dart. So I can quickly go to api.dart.dev, go to convert library. You see there's a bunch of stuff in here that discusses JSON. If it's not corrupt by my video, I'm checking out down here. So we can look at JSON encoder and decoder. Or you can just use the JSON encode to decode. Maybe those are better functions to look at. So JSON encode takes a value and a function, we won't get into that, and returns a string. That's it. And JSON decode takes a source string that's assumed to be a JSON document and returns back an object, dynamic, meaning it could be a bool, a string, a number, a list of things, and a map of string to something, to anything else. And that's basically it. The one special thing about JSON encode that trips up some people when they use JSON serializable is there's a special function in JSON encode, which is once it goes through and looks at the input object, if it's not a map, a list, a string, a bool, a num, it says, oh, does that object have a toJSON function on it? It basically just calls toJSON on the object. It throws a toJSON call over the wire, over the fence, and if it returns something, it uses that output. And so what's great is you don't have to manually have to call toJSON on an object. You just need to hand JSON encoder a class, an object instance that has a function called toJSON on it, and it'll get called. So let's go back to the source code quick. So I can do map string dynamic, to JSON. And I don't know what I'm going to do there yet, so let's just leave that open. And then there's a convention, at least I push, and I think other people do, which is if you want to create a new customer, you can create a factory. So let's do a factory customer from JSON. And again, we're not going to do anything with that quite yet. And let's see if I can make my screen just a little bit bigger here. Cool. And let's have the programmer, let's have the system do the work for us. So let's do JSON serializable. Just annotate that guy. Have the code showing up here. So there's customer. And one real quick thing here, just because I know what's going to happen, is let's do. So we have a part file that doesn't exist yet, but it will here really soon. So let's go back to our CLI and do pub and build it, and let's do watch. So again, it's to precompile things because I changed the dependencies. I added some stuff. I added JSON annotation and JSON serializable, and so it has to precompile build runner. And we're building a snapshot, waiting slowly. And again, we know that this first build is a little slow because it does a bunch of stuff. It creates a snapshot of the build script. So basically, it turns any configuration you have, and it turns it into a script that's run really quickly. And already we're seeing an issue, which is we have no default constructor, which is probably a bad thing. So let's just do that quick, and then boom, that gets run really quickly. And already we have our output. So already we have serialization for the customer, which is super great. So we have a function here that's given a map returns a customer, and you see I use the ... cascade syntax to go do the right things. It casts the types correctly. In the case of friends, this is pretty nuts, but pretty cool. It takes friends. If that thing exists, it's actually doing a null check there, but if it exists there, it mapping that to a map of string to customer, and does all the right things. And so here's the recursive call to from JSON. And likewise, turning things from a customer into JSON does the same stuff. And what's great is because, even though friends is, as we talked about over here, friends is a map of string to customer, that's totally fine. JSON serialization will handle that. So I don't have to do any special conversion from friends to JSON, because when JSON serializable, when the Dart convert library goes over and encodes that, it'll run into those objects and call to JSON automatically. But you notice this is just two top level functions here are not wired up. We actually need to wire them up, and I think Analyzer will even be yelling at us if I reran analysis, saying you have two functions that are not used. So let's wire those up here. So let's do from JSON here. Cool. And let's do customer to JSON from this. And everything's happy. So I could spend a lot of time drilling into more stuff you can do with JSON serializable, but there's actually a few other things I want to get to, and I've realized we're only 20 minutes into the live stream, and there's other kind of crazy things to look at. I would really recommend if people want to dig in here, I'll get into some more esoteric stuff, but I'd really recommend, I did all this crazy work to actually generate a table talking about all the ways you can annotate stuff. And actually what's crazy is this is done with the builder as well. So I actually walk through statically the JSON annotation package, grab these classes, find their fields, and I actually generate this table using a builder, which is pretty bananas. So you spend time looking at this. I think about maybe 2/5, 40% of the issues I get filed on JSON serializable class are on the repository. People are asking for features that already exist, and they just didn't see that there's features of this already. There are a couple features that are kind of the same if you're annotating a field versus if you're annotating the class. And also you can configure all these things in build.yaml. And so I get into how you can configure JSON serializable here. And just as some other interesting stuff that's a little nuts. The class itself, JSON serializable, is JSON serializable. And so that's actually how I go from the YAML in this configuration to JSON serializable, and that's the next thing I want to talk about. The other thing I would really recommend people spend time on, and let me go into the repository, before you file issues or give up or get confused, is look at the example repo. I tried to spend a bit of time creating some good examples here. I probably should update and make the docs better, truth be told. But this is a great place to start. And so I actually give an example of doing some pretty straightforward stuff, like, what if what if it's not nullable? That changes the output. Using constructors, using named arguments, that all works great. Annotating classes in different ways, and doing custom conversion. So I have examples of custom converters here. So for a while, I think I instead of encoding datetime with a UTF, with the RFC standard for datetime, I encode it as milliseconds or microseconds. And so I use custom converters here, functions, and so you can figure out how that works. And actually, I even go crazier with custom converters here. So I actually have a syntax for how you can create a converter to handle special classes. So if you want to have generics in your class, this is a model for how you can do custom things. So I really recommend people look at the example. So this is the JSON Serializable repository on GitHub, and there's an example subdirectory. Look at the example. And the great thing about doing example code here and not in docs, I realize people really like docs, keeping it here keeps us all honest, because I know that this code keeps working, keeps building. It has tests. And so I know this code right here is pretty fresh and works well. I'm going to look at the chat quick to see if there's any questions. Oh, Philip asking? Philip is on our DevRel team, and he's done a video on this already on the Boring Show. So, is he answer? Oh, he's answered questions for me. Oh, God bless him. Okay, good. I thought he was asking a question of me, but no, he's helping out folks too. So there's obviously other things that do the similar stuff. So you can look at something like built value from David Morgan, built collection, and it's a much stricter model for things, and it uses a very I don't know if elaborate, I mean that in all complimentary ways. It's a pretty powerful system for doing immutable stuff using a builder pattern. So there's other ways to skin this cat. But that's just one of them. So what I wanted to talk about next, so we talked about JSON Serializable and JSON Annotation. A quick thing, just for folks, again, that are curious, and this is good to know, is that you notice I have JSON Annotation in my normal dependencies and JSON Serializable in my runtime dependencies. And this is a little confusing. The JSON Serializable class that I annotate with, this is actually defined, it's my voice from talking so much, it's actually defined in the JSON Annotation package. And so since that is in code that's in my lib directory, I want that to be in my normal dependencies. The code that's run when I run a build, which is only something I do, as the package author, that's in dev dependencies. And this is a good distinction, because this is going to affect how your uses of your package are, what things they can use with JSON Annotation. There's actually some code in JSON Annotation. We'll talk about that in a second. But JSON Serializable, that shouldn't be a transitive dependency. That shouldn't be something that affects anyone that imports your library. So keep that in dev dependencies. Same thing with build runner. So I haven't, parsed any JSON here. I'll leave that as an exercise to the reader. What's fun about this, and what I think a lot of people don't realize, is that JSON is a valid subset of YAML. And obviously we use lots of YAML in the Dart ecosystem. And so I was thinking about this because I realized we have lots of places where we use YAML in Dart. We use it to configure builders. So there's a build.yaml file if you want to configure things. And the logic of creating a custom reader for YAML was kind of a pain. And I realized, why are we doing this work when we have this nice JSON Serializable thing? And so I created a kind of crazy, but it works pretty well, package and I added some features to JSON Serializable to make dealing with YAML much easier. So I have a little cheat sheet down here. Give me 1 second to open it up. Okay, so I'm going to come back into this. I haven't done anything. So we're back in our demo app. I'm going to paste in some code here. I think I'm going to get yelled at. I want to make sure checked YAML is actually a dependency. So let's bring in checked YAML. Oops, and actually this should be main. That's better. There we go. So I think checked YAML is being brought in by build runner, but it's important to actually depend on it. So let me bring in checked YAML here. And it's also important that I give a good dependency. So always add dependencies to your and versions, folks. It keeps us all very honest. Okay, let's close out our customer. We're not going to look at that now. So let's talk about a scenario where I want to, parse some arguments. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to take some input from my CLI, and part of that is I'm going to read a YAML file, which is super exciting. And what I want is, if I read my YAML file, I want to make sure that the YAML file is valid, and I want to get a nice object graph for my YAML. And if it's invalid, I want to see nice errors, right? I want to see parse errors and give the user some input if they have, if they gave me bad YAML. And when you see a good example of this, when you see a nice error message in your console, you're like, that's a nice package. And when you don't see one, you get sad. And so that's what I've done here. So I created a very simple class, and it basically has configuration, and it has a name and a count of the values. And so without getting into too many things here quick, I want to run it and see what happens. So let's do Dart, and let's do bin main, and let's just pass in my pub spec. Oops, got Dart, and pass my pub spec. Oops. And this is going to fail because I'm running a dev version of the Dart SDK that has a bug that's really annoying. So instead, I'm going to do this and get rid of all this stuff. So ignore this. Most of you should just be able to run Dart main.dart, because I have an old version of things that's not working. So I tried passing in my pub spec to this command line, and you see I get an error here, which is I have unrecognized keys, description, version, whatever, and the only keys that are supported are name and count. So let's actually create a file that this thing will really support. Sample.yaml. Cool. And name is Kevin, and count is 42, of course. And let's do this. So there I have a nice JSON output of my configuration. But you saw before I have some nice features here, right? So I can come into here and say, oh, let's make the count 42 as a string and rerun this. And you'll see, oh, unsupported value for count. And these great pointers to the problem that happened there. So how did I pull this off? A couple things. So if you look at the YAML package that exists in Dart, it's a pretty powerful package. There's a couple interesting caveats and nuances that I forget the exact details for, but it turns out that the map object you get when you parse YAML from the YAML package is not a map of string to dynamic or object. It's a map of dynamic to dynamic. And Natalie had very good reasons for this, and I forget what they are. But what that means is you actually need to say any map when you do your JSON serializable. And what you'll notice here is there's actually special handling in here. Although you don't see it in this output, it looks like, to new up the thing. But there's special handling that does not assume that the keys are strings. You just have to do it. You'll see that I passed in checked, meaning true. And what that means is so I'm going to jump over the generated code again. The generated code wraps the configuration of this object with a checked new. And that does basically some special stuff that actually captures the creation of the object. It captures the map, the source object that contains the input. Now here it's called JSON. It actually turns out it's YAML, but it's effectively JSON in terms of the format. And then I have some other things here saying I don't allow unrecognized keys, and all the fields are not nullable. And then down here I actually do some special work to say these things are required. And you'll see that I basically have a set of functions. So I call this checked keys function that makes sure that it passes in saying these are the allowed keys and these are the required keys. You'll see every time that I assign a field, I don't assign a field directly from the value from the input map, the input JSON. I actually wrap it with a thing called checked convert. And all of these functions do is they do a bunch of work to throw the right kind of error. That's it. And they throw helpful errors. If you look at checked new, you'll notice I do a bunch of work to throw this checked from JSON exception. And what's powerful about that is it actually includes the map that was used to create the thing. And if you look at package YAML a little bit, you'll notice that the YAML code, the YAML package, does a really great job of corresponding all of the values in the YAML back to the source input file. And so you actually get offset information into the file that, or the content YAML that you parsed. And what that means, you can get really, really nice error messages. And so you can format this some more. And you'll notice in my little CLI here, I basically do the work to call checked YAML to code, and I pass in the content and kind of the factory that's used and the source URI. And so this checked YAML to code is the magic function that turns all of those little exceptions that are thrown and gives you a really nice output. And in fact, this will throw an exception. This throws this parsed YAML exception, and you can catch this exception yourself and do cool, nice, interesting, powerful things with it. And so I'd recommend people play with this. If you're ever in a place where you're building a CLI or anything that parses YAML that's kind of user visible, and you want to give nice error messages, you can do this. And in fact, you don't necessarily have to use YAML either. You could do input, JSON as your input, and that'll work fine. In fact, I don't think it really cares. It's actually, YAML. Well, yeah, I could do the same thing here and do. I can make this YAML, and the parsing of this should work fine. Yep. And if I come in here and make this, a string, I still get good errors. So I do this all the time now. I never parse YAML without this, and it makes things really easy. So we did JSON, and then we extended things out to YAML. Well, where else do we have a case where we have some input we're parsing from the user that's well formed, but probably contains lots of strings, and we want to parse it into nice objects? Hint, hint, CLI. So if anyone's dealt with argparser in Dart, again, another great package that was done, I think, a lot of work by Natalie, and I think Bob did some work there too. This is a package that lets you define a schema effectively and map user input in the command line to basically a map of values, arguments, options, and values. Wouldn't it be cool if you could just write a class that did that? So I'm going to do something even crazier here, I think. And now I'm definitely fishing without a net. I'm going to go back into this class. And first let me go in here. Now I'm going to add in a build CLI annotation class, and I forget the version. And let's get those things. Annotations. Let's try that one. There we go. And so this is 1.2.0, and build CLI is 1.3.7. And look at the chat quick to see if there's any comments. People that are excited about parsing YAML. Good, cool. So let's go back to main. I'm not going to change anything. I'm going to leave JSON serializable here. I want this to stay JSON serializable. But on top of this, I'm going to add a annotation which is build CLI options. And then I go back and I'm going to run my builder. And that's to precompile because I added some dependencies. And again, I'm definitely doing this without a net, so hopefully this all ends up working. Building my snapshot. I really push to have reticulating splines just sprinkled in here for all those folks who played SimCity. That's an error that I need to talk to Jake about, but a warning, don't worry about that. And we have an output. So now let's go to our generated code, and you'll see that we have output from JSON serializable, which looks familiar. Oops. JSON serializable. So this is the code that we just generated. And now you see all the stuff for an arg parser. And so now we can create an arg parser from list. So actually, leaning back up further, there's a bunch of helpers here that are private. You don't have to use if you don't want. But the core thing is, I now have a function that, given a list of string args, will give me a configuration object. Okay? So I'm going to go back into this code. I'm going to get rid of all these things, because I'm not going to use the build YAML stuff quite yet. And what I'm going to do is, I'm going to say final config equals, and then remember what I called this, parse configuration for arguments. Okay? And that ran. Let's go into, oops, I forgot what directory I was in. Dart build live stream. Oops, and of course remember we have our crazy, and already we're getting an error, which is the source must not be null. But let's see here. If I go in here, we can see that I created, there's a name and a count, so I can do -- name equals Kevin, and say -- count is 42. It works. In fact, let me make it a little more interesting, and I can go print, and might as well just do config to JSON. Oops, because I still have the to JSON code in there, right? So, just take a deep breath. I wrote no arg parser, and the arg parser logic, I mean, it's powerful and it does what you kind of want, right? But it's tedious. I have to, reference count, and I have to do an int parse the thing, and I want to make sure that, is there a bad number format, and do I have, do the right thing there? And I do that all for you. In fact, I actually did the work so that I call try parse, which will return null if it fails. And then on null, I actually do the work to throw a good format exception so that that, my input is not the right type. And it just works. So I actually went and created your, actually, sorry, I'm scrolling around a lot here. Let me make sure I find the right thing. So the parser for configuration is right here. Populate the parser. And actually, this code, it makes a lot of sense. I could get into it later. It turns out that you often want these special things. So again, I won't get into this too much unless you know arg parser well. Sometimes you want this function where you can create your own arg parser. Maybe you want to customize things. So you have these functions to call if you want to. But in general, I just call add option. And this is where, my paranoia kind of spikes, which is anytime I see the same string more than once or twice, that's a smell to me. Like, okay, I'm referencing count once or twice. That's bad. I'm going to fix it. And so that's kind of my inspiration here. But really quickly, we can say, there's other things we want to do. So let's go into this name thing. It gets a little crazy, but, it's very readable. I now know the configuration. I can go in here and go CLI option, which is a key for this guy. And I can say, let's do abbreviation. And let's just do N. And let's do an abbreviation for this guy. And let's do C. Sure. And let's do, you can do your own converter, default, help. This is the count. Don't let me write your help. This is the name. And you'll see already, oops, it had to rejigger things. I'm now, defining the help for the command and the abbreviation. So now I should be able to come in here. Actually, let me go back in here again. Let me add in a final bool help. Cool. Let's save that. You'll notice that already I have a flag. So these are done as options. Bools are automatically added as flags, which is fine, and kind of what I want. And what this means is I can go back to my main thing here. I can go if config.help equals true. I do that because it could be null. I can do print. And this is where you want the other things that I've generated. So actually come in here and get the parser. And there should be a usage. And then I'll just return. So now I can come in here and that still runs. I can do -- help as you'd expect. Source must not be null. Uh-oh. Oh, so I think, let me do this and go, nullable true. Is that it? Hold on a second. Uh-oh. This is where I get myself in trouble. Oh no, the source must not be null. That's right. Just 1 second. Is everyone in the chat screaming at me? No, Kevin, this is what it does. Oh yeah. Name must not be null. Let's just get rid of that for now. Or I can go, haha. If help unequals true, let's do that. Uh-oh. Now everyone's seriously sitting in their thing screaming at me. Kevin, what are you doing wrong? Int.parse. Oh, are you kidding me? Then parse. Anyway. Oh, this is where I get in trouble. Trying to show cool stuff. You can't do help this way. Let's just get rid of that. Let's get rid of that. There you go. Okay, that's a little bit better. Yeah, because in parsing gets crazy. I could have done the default, actually. At least you can go back. But this is actually the crazy thing, right? So I just removed the field. It was done. It worked. Cool. Let me come back in here. Do that. And we do defaults to 0. There you go. And so, like, the speed with which you can go and, like, oh, I have a CLI that parses the objects. It just works, which is really crazy. I actually did this in a package I call Peanut. Let's see. It's a class decorator. Defaults to useful help. Okay, I'm looking at the chat real quick. Nothing too crazy there. I actually do this in a package I maintain that's kind of nuts called Peanut, and does a bunch of crazy stuff. But what I'm going to show you here is, let's see, in the README. Let's see, do I have docs in the README? I do. Not a lot of docs. But basically, so there's CLI options here for doing a whole bunch of stuff in Peanut. And this, so background, Peanut is a package that does the work to build your web app and your Flutter web app, and actually will build it to another branch for you in a very clean way. So I can be checked out master with all my code with a web directory, you know, whether it's Flutter web or normal Dart web, that I can run. And actually, it doesn't have to be a web directory. In this example, it's an example directory. And then you can run Peanut, and I'll do the work to build the code. I build it off to a temp directory for you, and then I update your GH pages branch for you. So you can push your examples without having to like check out your project twice and rebuild it or copy the output. It just works really nice for you. And what I realized is I had a whole bunch of places where I wanted to have, so I built this and it has CLI options, so I can say, oh, by default, use this directory, or you know, output to this branch. Then I realized, oh, I actually want to be able to have configuration for this, so that, you know, if you know, it's not the web directory, it's example, I don't have to type in -d example all the time. And so I created a YAML configuration, and this is all done with this trick. And so I think, watch it, it's not that, and oh yeah, no, it's here. So I have options, and the options is both JSON serializable and CLI options. So I can create my arg parser and give you a nice options file that you can just use in your CLI like you expect. And then on top of that, if you want to also have configuration I want configuration for my CLI, I use JSON serializable with the checked YAML crazy, and I get both. And so with the exact same code, so if I want to add an option to do something else with Peanut, I can add it in this class, maybe tweak annotations, and for free I get both a YAML configuration object and a CLI from one object, one class. And it works great. And then in my testing, I can validate the parsing works correctly by just validating the to JSON from it. So it ends up being super nice, super useful. So there's all that crazy stuff. And where are we on time? I do have a really important meeting at about 10:45. So I want to be cautious of time here. One last thing I just wanted to show Let me bring up my thing. Build verify. So you've done all this work to create a builder in your package, and maybe you're building to code because you're generating stuff. Something that I ran into a lot was that I'd forget to run my builder before I checked in. And I should back up a little bit, and I might do... There was another great person, I should find his link here. Actually, let me find it, I'll post it. There was somebody that did a great series on the build package already, and I could go into more of the kind of build itself, and SourceJen. SourceJen's another kind of layered thing on top of that. So there's cases where you're not building to source, and that's generally like if you're compiling to JavaScript. So Angular does this a lot. Or JS compilers it's called building to cache. So it doesn't dump the files in your package. And there's lots of good reasons to do that. My philosophy here on checking in build code is that if this is code you would check in anyway, if you're just using the build system and these tools as kind of a helper, like your little handyman or woman, it's good to check in that code, because then people can just use your package, especially if you're letting people use your package. You don't want them, force them to have to run your builder. So I just consider the build system as like my little handyman, writing code that I would write anyway, and I check the code in, and that way if someone's using this package, they don't have to run a builder themselves. That's kind of my logic for it. But what I found was, if you change the version of something, you change the version in your pubspec.yaml, did you remember to run your build again? And that's where build verify comes from. And instead of wiring it all up, I might just show you here how I use it. And so this is the Peanut package again. And I depend on build verify. So you should see build verify here in my dev dependencies. And what I do, this is my convention I use, and you can do that as well, is that I tag it as pre-submit only. And I call this expect build clean. And so this expect build clean, again, is a very simple function in this class. And what it does is, there's some stuff around if you want to change how things are executed. Yeah, I know. And if you're running on Windows, I would actually check there. By default, I just run pub run build runner build. And what this does is it makes sure that for the current package, running a build shouldn't change anything. Again, it should be completely hermetic. And I tag it as pre-submit only, and then if you look, there's actually a way to configure the test package, and I say, anything tagged with pre-submit only should only be run during pre-submit. And then on Travis, I'm jumping around here a bit, you'll see that I have a task here that says run skipped, because that's a skipped thing, and run the pre-submit only tagged things. So just again, because I don't want to rerun the build every time I run tests locally, so I create a test, and this is it. I say, my test is ensure build, and I just call this function, so it just calls it as a lambda. Expect build clean is from build verify. I tag it pre-submit only. I configure the test package here to skip it, so it's only run, so by default it's not run. And then on Travis, or whatever your favorite CI is, I say, okay, run that skip test and verify the build. And all this does is make sure that the code you have checked in, if you run a build, no changes happen. And if there has been a change, it'll fail. And this catches me all the time where I've changed a field or changed an option and I forgot to rerun my builder. Usually what happens is I change the version from a -dev to a release build, and before I publish, this catches me. So I have a very strict rule, which is I try not to publish a package unless Travis is green on master. And so build verify is your helper there. So if you find yourself using builders in your own packages, that's a great way to make sure to kind of keep you honest. And that's the end of my agenda. I got nervous at the beginning because I was going fast, and I was like, or going slow, and I was like, oh no, I need to catch up. But I think I've gone through things. So let's see here. Let me look at my questions quick. Is there a way to have Flutter Run watch automatically and call build runner for us? That is a great question. I have not done that much stuff with the build package in Flutter apps, because usually when I'm using the build package and build things, I'm doing it for kind of CLI stuff and tools. So I need to find that out. I've heard that feedback from a few people that using package build with Flutter is tough. I don't know if people have tried doing Flutter pub or Flutter packages pub run or Flutter pub run build runner, if that works. Try that out and put comments below. I'd love to find out. I'm happy to dig in and find out for people, because I know a lot of people want to use this stuff with Flutter. Although a lot of these tricks are for other packages. Let me look real quick to see if there's other. Oh, I've got someone else like reticulating splines. I'm scrolling through really quick to see if there's any questions here. Everyone wants to know about Flutter. I guess that makes lots of sense. I wanted to see quick. I'm going to go into pub.dev, and let's do build CLI. So these are all my personal packages I maintain. I was seeing if there's anything else in here that's interesting. Build version we talked about. Build verify we talked about. Completion, if you're curious, I did some work so that for Bash and CSH, if you wire things up correctly with your arg parser, we can actually do command completion in the CLI. I need to spend more time with this package. I haven't done much. But if you ever wanted to do command completion in a Dart app, look at the completion package. One thing that's a little nuts right now is that it has to run the whole app to get the arg parser so that the completion works, and that can be kind of slow unless the app is already precompiled. And so I've had some discussions with folks about, is there a way we could basically pre-package your args in a way that can parse very fast. And so if anyone wants to dig in there, you can look at that. SourceJen test is a package I use if you build your own SourceJen generator. SourceJen test is a great way to test that, and has a bunch of really nice utilities for testing SourceJen based builders. I'm going to look really quick here to see if there's more comments. I know I said about an hour and a half. I think I'm going to stick at an hour because my voice is very tired and I have a meeting at 10:45 I really need to discuss. Really quick, I think, before I say goodbye, though, is I would love to know if there are other topics that people would find interesting for another live stream. I'm happy to do this more. It's fun. So I'm going to wait 20 seconds to see if the chat goes nuts there. It's nice to see that I have 45 people still paying attention and seeing what's going on. I hope the quality's been okay. And I swear the coughing is just for me talking for 45 minutes straight. I usually don't. I would love to, I think something else I want to get into is talking about SourceJen, which I think it'd be just fun to talk to more people about. So the build package does a very simple thing, which is just a builder. And so it takes kind of the core input is a single file or potentially a set of files, generally a single file, and generates a single file. What SourceJen lets you do, file deleting builder. Yes, you cannot delete files. You cannot delete files or change files in a builder, and that's by design because you want it to be hermetic. So anyway, package build is meant to go from file to file effectively. What SourceJen lets you do is generate bits of output for a part or a library from elements in a library. And so it really is meant to go from Dart source to Dart source instead of just file to file. And so when you see these tricks where I do and annotate something with build CLI or JSON serializable, that's using SourceJen, package SourceJen. What package SourceJen lets you do is say, for classes, or any member really, annotated with this annotation, so for classes annotated with this thing, let me create, we call it a generator. And a generator is kind of part of a builder. And so you can compose many generators together into one builder. And what that lets you do is do things like, annotate a class and say, oh, I want to generate some helper for this, which is super nice. And there's a bunch of really nice utilities inside package SourceJen as well for basically looking at a library and like reading a library, reading things, members out of a class, finding out the types of things, which is obviously really important for things like JSON serializable and build CLI, because you need to do different things if things are enums or other stuff. In fact, actually, let me do that as one kind of final hurrah example here. Let me go back to my example. This is these are things that take forever to write, but they're so cool when they work. Enum. Let's do my options because I'm bad at naming things. Let's do alpha, beta, gamma, delta. Sure, I have my Greek down. And really quick, I'm actually going to go into here and bring in my source control because I want to show you what changes when I write this. So here's my alpha, beta, gamma. Let me add a field to configuration, and let's just call this let's just call it silly. And let's make sure that the generator is still running. It is. And let's see what changed. So now what you'll notice is I did some magic here to handle the enum. I can decode the enum and do the right thing, so go from a string to the output value, which is what you expect. And then I did actually the work in CLI, to actually parse it, and I did the work so it's like, oh, like what are the allowed values for that class? And so I think if I go back to my CLI now and I run help, I get an error, of course. Oh yes, and this is a bug I need to fix. Because JSON serializable and CLI options both generate the same helper map, it fails spectacularly. So I'm going to delete that really quick. Actually, even better, I'm going to just instead of deleting that, sorry, I'm going to go into this. I'm going to say JSON key and ignore it. There we go. So now this will not parse with JSON. And there we go. And so now you notice that so I can, pass in an option that isn't in the enum, and I get a nice error that is not allowed in that option. And so these are the things that just take you forever, right? It's like, oh no, just write an enum, and then the parsing will just do the right thing for you. So, yeah, donate to your favorite charity, helping out during these crazy times, if you appreciate this stuff, because it was pretty nuts to implement. I won't take any payments personally, but I'll take your karma and your likes, and donate in my name to a charity of your choice. Because doing this kind of parsing and dealing with enums is pretty nuts. But when it works out really nice. So it's 10:02. I've been going for about an hour now. I think YouTube might kick me off at some point. But I wanted to say thank you for everyone. Webcam blocking. Uh-oh. Yeah, I said 10 o'clock, and this might be one of my children coming in to say hi. So I hope everyone takes care of themselves. I hope this was interesting. If you liked it, I guess add a like. I feel like I'm one of those guys. Squarespace is not sponsoring this channel. Follow me on Twitter and YouTube. I guess subscribe if you want to. I'll probably do most of my talking on Twitter if I do these again. And let me know if doing another talk on SourceJen in particular would be interesting. Or something else. I guess some people mentioned server stuff, which I do a little bit. I'd be happy to dig in there. Also, let me know if I talked too fast. I wasn't thinking too much about how quickly I speak. And generally, I speak too fast. So I need to be careful about that. But as I said before, we live in scary times. Take care of yourselves and people around you, and help where you can. And we'll see you on the internet.